The next version of color correcting that I'm going to teach you is really, really precise, and it's mathematical. I don't believe we've done this one. If we did, stop me. But even if we did, I think we're going to do it again. This is one that people think it's hard, they think it's confusing, they don't want to deal with it, but I promise you this one is so good because it's not, you're not worried about your eye, what you think is right. It's a mathematical, this is right, this is wrong. So we are going to start by opening this picture of race car 1, the yellow race car. And here's our image. We didn't do this one, correct? We've not done this version. No, I didn't think so, but I've taught this class a couple thousand times. So anybody think there's a color cast going on here? Something, right? So neutral gray is the best point where we can tell that something has a color cast. Is there anything in this image that should be a tone of gray? How about the road? the drive, right? This is more of a light gray. Maybe this stripe right here above the yellow stripe is more of a dark gray or a black. Those are definite things that should be gray, and we want to find out. So we're going to use that sample point where we're going to measure the color and find out what it really is. So go to that tool that is the color sampler tool, and we're going to click. I'm going to go to the front right of the race car in this light gray area, and I'm going to click once somewhere in here to make my first sample point. Then I want you to go to this info panel that popped up, and you should see RGB coordinates of that measurement spot for point number 1, correct? Who's winning the tug of war? Blue. 163, 173, 206. Okay, now let's make a second sample point in a darker gray. So like I said, this stripe right below the car but above the yellow stripe, that's a darker version of gray. I'm going to click and put sample point number 2 there. Let's look at our information panel. We now have reference point number 2. Who's winning the tug of war? By a lot, right? It's definitely blue that's winning. Okay, here's the part that some people don't like, but this is what makes this work. Calculator. There's the calculator, and I just made it go away. Here's the thing. We need to look at our blue or RGB points for number 1. So for point number 1, and you're all going to have to do this on your own because wherever your points are different. So I would recommend you maybe a piece of paper or something to write this down. So my point number 1, and I'm going to read that up there, is 163, 173, 206. 163, 173, 206. So to find the average of those numbers, you need to use, unless you're really good at math, a trusty calculator and add them all up. Just for point 1. And then to get the average of that, divide by 3. You get a fraction, you can round it up. So for me, my point number 1, if that would be a perfect neutral gray, it would be 181 red, 181 green, 181 blue. And that's going to take out any color cast, and it's going to be a perfectly neutral light gray. Okay? Everybody got that idea? Do that for point 2 also. So go back and look at your numbers for point 2. And yours are going to be different depending on where you clicked. right, everybody have your two numbers or getting to them? For my second point, my darker point, in order for that to be a neutral dark gray, mine should all average out to be 140. So a couple of them need to come up, and RGB, the blue, needs to go down so that it's all neutraled out. So this is great. We have our numbers. Now how do we actually use them? We're going to use them using a curves adjustment layer manually, channel by channel, for two different points. So do you guys remember we did a curves adjustment layer? It looked like our levels, but levels only allow you to change three places. Your highlight, white point, your black point, and your midpoint, and only one midpoint. Whereas a curve was that diagonal line, and we could add dots to it and kind of make it have an S shape. So we could add lots of points anywhere on that line, but I said don't go crazy. You don't want a ton of different points on that line. We're going to actually add 2 points to it. We're going to change the dark point of the gray and the light point of the gray to be wherever those numbers tell us they should be, and it's going to make our curve S-shaped, and it's going to clean this up perfectly. Okay? So, everybody have your numbers, and we're ready to do our next step? Okay. Alrighty. Add a curves adjustment layer. So come down to the add adjustment layer and go to curves. So here it is, and in the past we would have just maybe grabbed onto this curve and pulled up or down or added points willy-nilly wherever we wanted to. Now we're going to do it 100% mathematically. If you can't see the bottom of the curves window where it says input output, drag down whatever your layers panel or whatever happens to be in the way, drag it down. It's important that we can see input and output. It's also important that you do not change the anchor point that's way down here at the lower left at the black point, nor you don't change this anchor point at the top right. So we're not pulling this over to make a change or this over or up like this. We're not doing that. We're leaving those 2 points where they are, but we're going to add 2 points on this diagonal. And if you remember, the left side of our histogram is the dark pixels. The right side where it's white are the bright pixels. So the first sample point that we did is this brighter one, right? Now, because we know that, we know we can click somewhere on this top half of the diagonal line, but to be honest, it doesn't matter. You can click anywhere on this diagonal line to start. But we need to do this channel by channel. So go into the drop-down box for RGB and choose red. Here's our red channel. We're going to do point 1 first. So we're going to click on the upper point. Whoa. We're going to click somewhere on our curves line and make an anchor point anywhere. It does not matter where. Now we're going to look at our numbers for point 1. For red, I had 163 as my starting point. So in the input box, I'm going to type in 163. That's where it measured out. But for output, I'm going to say, that's not where I want you to be anymore. And mine, I don't know if you noticed, but that dot moved down on my line to match up exactly where that 163 point is. But what it really needs to be, in my example of the averaging, is 181. So I'm going to type in 181. Notice how it bumped it up a little bit in that exact point. Okay. Let's do the green anchor point for that first point. So switch to green, make a click anywhere on this diagonal line, and then type in what point 1 green was. In my case, up here it was 173, or I can look over here. It was 173. So I type in 173, but what I want it to be is my average number of 181. Okay, see how I'm changing in my info panel? Red used to be 163, now it's 181. Green used to be 173, now it's 181. Now I need to go and change the blue channel. So I'm going to click anywhere on this diagonal line for a start point, and then the input of blue was 206. You can see that right here. And what I need it to be is 181. So now when we look at info point number 1, the 3 RGB coordinates that it used to be are now all neutral, 181. They're the exact same number, and it already looks much better. Like, this is a better correction right off the bat. But we're not done, because we actually sampled 2 points. So we're going to go back to our red channel. We're going to start all over, and now we're going to repeat that process with our endpoint number 2. Or input point number 2, which was this darker sample down here on the darker. So click anywhere on your curve. It is going to be towards the left because it's a darker point, but it doesn't matter. You can just start there. And then your input for point number 2, red, mine was 116. But the number that we came up with as an average for me was 140. Then I'm going to go and do the green. I'm going to click somewhere on the curve point. My input for green was 131. You can see that right here. But where I want it to be is 140. And then finally the blue channel, make your anchor point. Blue came in at 172. You can see that right here, even if I didn't write it down. And blue needs to actually be at 140. And there is your mathematical color correction based on 2 neutral gray points. And if you turn off the eyeball, you see our beginning and ending. Does anybody think that's kind of cool? Using math to make it look right. And the cool thing about this is that it's not like your preference, like, oh, I like it a little warmer, I want a little bit more yellow. This is none of that nonsense. This is pure, RGB values are exactly the same, they're neutral, there's no color cast, and therefore it cleans up the whole overall picture. Okay? Any questions? Because I know that can be confusing. When I open this, I'm going to see a curves layer. I'm going to go into all 3 channels, and I should see, actually, if you want, 4 points, because you are not messing with the low black and the high white. You're adding 2 additional ones in the middle and tweaking the curve there. Okay? Sometimes I come in and I'll see where people took this point, and for whatever reason, I'm not even in there anymore, am I? Whatever. They cranked up this lower point, or they made it do this. See how ugly that is when you start doing stuff like that? So leave, ugh, that's terrible. Undo, undo. There we go. Leave your top black point and your lower white point, or lower black, top white, and add 2 more points to your curve and tweak them based on your 2 sample points. Also, in order to make this work, you have to use the color sampler tool to sample those 2 points and get your numbers. So when I open your file, I should also be able to see number 1 and number 2. Those will actually open with the file too. Any questions? Okay. You guys are very quiet today. I would recommend maybe you just save that so you have something to look back at and remind yourself. You don't have to, but if you want to save this file for your own reference, go ahead and do that. And then you may close it. Oops.